Why is it that paying off all your credit debt can reflect badly? Because you're out of the game. Your credit score is not an indicator of creditworthiness. It's an indicator banks created that tells them how much they can expect to make off of you. If a credit score was really an indicator of creditworthiness, then the people who are disciplined enough to avoid debt would have the highest scores, and so would the people who infrequently open lines of credit for large purchases, but pay them off way ahead of schedule and close them. This behavior should signal to the bank that you're the most responsible, right? If you generally stay out of debt, and always pay it back early on the rare occasion you do borrow, you're the most trustworthy borrower that exists. But that's not how the banks look at it. The banks prefer people who stay in perpetual debt, and reward those people with higher credit scores, so they can take on more perpetual debt. Don't believe me? Just look at the things that make your credit score go up. 1. Long-term debt, houses and cars. Banks love these because the return is predictable. They know that over the life of the loan, they will get a 100% return on their money. 2. Carrying balances on credit cards. Banks ideally like to see 30% of your limit carried month over month on a credit card. Carry more than that and you're considered a risk. Carry less than that, and they penalize you for not using enough. They want you to stay in the sweet spot where your spending and interest are predictable, because that's where they make the most money with the least risk. 3. Running a card up every month, paying it off in full, then repeating the same behavior the next month. Banks love these people too, because they're a predictable low-risk revenue source. The bank is making less money on interest, but more money on the fees charged to merchants. Less risk plus more income equals happy bank. Now let's look at the positive borrower behaviors that hurt your credit score. 1. Paying loans off early. This should be a strong indicator of creditworthiness. After all, who is more worthy of credit than those who demonstrate they can pay it off ahead of schedule? Instead, you get penalized for this. Why? Because the banks aren't making as much as they expected to when they gave you the loan. 2. Having credit cards but never using them. If you don't buy things on credit, and only even have a credit card for an emergency, this too should tell banks that you are responsible and can be trusted above all others. Instead, they penalize you for this. Your credit score is reduced because the banks know they aren't going to make much money off you. 3. Closing accounts after they are paid off, without replacing them with new debts. Again, this should tell the banks that you're the most trustworthy of borrowers. You got credit, you used it, you paid it off, and you closed the account. You're the embodiment of personal responsibility. But once again, the banks ding you for this, because once again, you aren't making them enough money. Notice the pattern? You're rewarded with a high credit score when you play the game in the way that makes them the most money, and penalized when you don't play the game the way they want you to. Think about this at a personal level. If you had to assign credit scores to all of your friends, which friend would score higher? The one who hardly ever asks to borrow money, but when they do they pay you back way earlier than they said they would? Or the one who is always asking for money and always making payments on the last time they borrowed? Obviously everyone would rank the first friend higher than the second, so why don't the banks? Because scores aren't about creditworthiness, it's about ROI, and they've been brainwashing people their whole lives into believing the opposite. I'll leave you with one final observation. This is an actual photo of my credit scores. Yep, all zeros. I have no debt. No credit cards, no auto loans, no mortgages, no debt of any kind. At one point I had a high credit score, and as my income increased and I started paying everything off, I watched it drop. No late payments. No defaults. Perfect payment history. Just paid everything off ahead of schedule and closed the accounts. Yet today, a lot of banks wouldn't lend to me. Despite having all of the elements that should indicate I'm about as safe of a bet as one could make, including owning more than one home outright, some land, multiple vehicles, and plenty of cash on hand, they don't care. When you aren't playing the game the way they want you to play it, they put you in the penalty box. Meanwhile, they'll give a friend of mine an 800+ credit score even though he makes a fourth of what I make, has no assets that he doesn't owe a bank money on, and has more than $1 million worth of debt. Why? Because he's a cash cow for the bank. He's playing the game exactly the way they want, and they reward him by giving him more opportunities to be in debt and make them more money. It makes perfect sense when you understand what their goals are, and what a credit score really is. It's not an indicator of your credit worthiness, it's an indicator of profitability. The higher the number, the more the banks can expect to profit from your behavior.